Welcome everyone. Class number 3 in Hermetic Progressions in Action. Tonight's class is on minor arcana, but I wanted to talk about... Yeah, I really should have had a nap today. That was my heart's deepest wish. Yeah, we'll do progressions tonight and the Tarot class next year. Very good, thank you, I stand corrected. Quote for the night: "The cosmos is a vast living body, of which we are still parts. The sun is a great heart, whose tremors run through our smallest veins. The moon is a great nerve center from which we quiver forever. Who knows the power that Saturn has over us, or Venus? But it is a vital power, rippling exquisitely through us all the time." D.H. Lawrence, he actually used to live here in New Mexico.
Oh, yeah?
Up near Taos. This is what I want to talk about first. Our interpretation guidelines, whether we're looking at majors, minors, or transits. There are guidelines that we use when we look at and interpret a chart. So the first of these guidelines is we determine whether or not a progressed aspect attracts fortunate or unfortunate events is determined less by the nature of the aspect by progression and more by the conditioning of the planet in the natal chart. Are those words clear to everyone? Basically, what's determining if your progression is going to bring in favorable or unfavorable conditions to your life is not whether this is a progressed opposition or square or trine or sextile. We look at the planets that are forming the aspect, we go to the natal chart, and preferably if you have astrodynes available to you, nothing spells it out better than the astrodynes to determine the inherent conditioning of that planet and its ability to attract good or ill. Welcome. So, basically, the thing that is so important to keep in mind is going back to the natal chart. This is why when an astrologer takes a client for the first time, much like intake at a doctor's office, if you're visiting a new doctor for the first time, that doctor is going to have you sit down and fill out a case history. Describe every medication you're taking and basically what illnesses you've had in the past. And they are going to ask you things such as, anyone in your family have diabetes, etc. So basically they're trying to get a full picture of you before they go any further. So the same with astrology. Oftentimes clients will come to an astrologer and say, oh, well, I've already had my natal chart done. I just want you to do my progressions. But if you're visiting with that person for the first time, it's to the benefit of the astrologer to actually sit and discuss the natal chart with the individual first before the progressions, because that way you get to see the conditioning energy inherent in the chart. You get to understand how that individual habitually works with those experiences. And then when you go on to the progressions, they reflect back to what the patterns are in the natal chart. If you remember from last week, we discussed the fact that major progressions have 1/2 the power of the natal chart. So the natal chart is that much more powerful.
Christopher, that's just a temporary thing, right? The power that it adds, it's just a temporary power. It doesn't, is it cumulative?
No, it only lasts for the period that the aspect is in orb. However, Vicki, what an unspoken part to that question. What is accumulative is the experience you gain under that aspect. The thing is, you can have an aspect come into your chart and last for 18 months or last for 11 years. And the aspect goes out of orb. So what's happening is the temporary stellar aerial is no longer feeding energy into the natal chart. But what you learned during that period of your life, whatever whether they were for good or for ill, the habits that you cultivated at that time can become an integrated part of the psyche of the individual or the organism, subconscious organism, and that is what you take with you after an aspect. And, being the proud survivor of my own chart, I always like to say that I actually make the biggest steps towards growth in my life under adverse aspects. Not that I'm asking for any more, God. But in retrospect, you actually never feel that way while you're going through them. But when you look at the building blocks of character that then become a part of your whole afterwards, you get to look back on those periods and say, hey, look what I can do. This is now a part of me based on that trial by fire. So, don't know where I went down that tangential lane, but hey, let's look at another guideline.
Thank you, that was interesting.
All right, the more powerful of the two planets in the natal chart tends to be the stellar aerial that receives the greater stimulus. I think what I want to do is go through all of these rules, and then as we look at charts tonight, we'll apply them so that we actually get a hands-on experience of that. You have two planets in aspect by any aspect. So again, this is something that the human being can do, which the computer cannot yet do. It cannot synthesize the information in a chart when it does a reading. It can only take a little statement that is cued to Sun trine Jupiter and say this. What the astrologer can do is look at that, see the relative power of both planets in the individual's chart, have spoken with that individual to know what their habit systems are already in place, and then they can identify which of the two planets is stronger. And that helps you to understand which of the aerials may be receiving the greatest stimulus during this temporary period. So that's what we look at in a chart. Did that one make sense to everyone? As I always say, the dominant planet in your chart, in your natal chart, all of the other planets bow to it. In a sense, they have bent their urges to some degree. All of those urges are expressing, but they have bent their urges to some degree to allow the dominant planet to express as the master component of the individual. And then it's the same by progression. Which of those two planets is stronger? More than likely, but again, every rule is made to be broken, more than likely, the energy will funnel in the direction of the more powerful planet. Why? There are courses of habit set up already in that direction. So energy generally takes the line of least resistance. All right, number 3, very important, especially tonight and next week as we look at minor progressions and as we look at transit aspects. Even with major progressions, you can have an aspect and never have an event. However, it is very rare that you will have an event in your life and not have a major progressed aspect that mirrors that event. So, Keep that in mind. Just because the energy is moving on the inner plane, environment is key. And that is something that the Brotherhood of Light lessons, unlike many other areas of metaphysical thought, continue to emphasize that the inner plane energy, excuse me, the inner plane energy can only express to the extent that the environment allows it to.
Christopher, event, that causes me to wonder, well, how do you define an event? I mean, it sounds pretty, like it should I should know what that means, but.
Well, you had many events today. Those were events, Vicki. If we go backwards, the events were having a conversation with Erica about her workshop and the high prices in Santa Fe. Prior to that, the events were cooing over delicious Indian food and how much of it there was. And prior to that, there was the pulling your hair out frustration over missing, links in emails and all of the responses you were getting. We could go back just on a daily basis to events.
Okay.
Probably none of those would be things that in the future you'd include in your memoirs.
Right. Okay.
But the food was really good.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah,
That's
might
great.
write about that.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's not like birthing a baby or getting a job promotion or moving to a new house or the things that we consider psychological stressors.
Okay.
Those are things that we consider to be big events. What I just described to you, those were all events, but those are more minor events. They are events in a day of a life, though of less significance. Does that work with everyone?
I think so.
Those are events.
Okay.
Now, when we're looking at progressions, there are a variety of events that people are looking at. For the most part, the general theme is love and money.
So does it have to do with what you're looking for, what your awareness is? Is awareness a key to defining an event?
Can I contemplate that a few weeks?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have an answer for that tonight.
Okay,
But,
yeah, no, that's-
but we know that awareness is part of the process, and I think even now in the realm of quantum physics, they're deciding that the observer impacts the outcome of an experiment.
Right.
So I think expectation and what we're looking for defines events also.
Well, I think what I'm thinking in terms of is that I've looked at people's charts before, and I'll observe something, and I will mention that to the person, and it will be something it's as if that's not a reality for that individual. Whereas I know the individual, I've observed it to be so, and they still do not claim that as a part of their character. So you wonder, well, so does it have to do with what you're aware of?
Right, and again, each
So
of
you
us
need to think
has,
about it, right.
yeah, each of us has blind spots.
Right.
So when somebody else may be discussing components of our character, etc., there are certain things that, there are some people who are more open to awareness than others. For some people, awareness of certain things can be so painful that it's blocked out. Much like the information, and we're really digressing here, but much like the information that comes through one's dreams, depending on your sensitivity level, not everything can be shown you in Technicolor. It can't all be in living color, because to experience certain things that might happen in advance in your life ahead of time could be distressing to some people. So it comes through as symbols or feelings or suggestions of things. And And that, that could be a class unto itself.
Okay.
Is perception, interpretation, all of that. So, an event,
Okay. It's
Well, when we actually look at charts, it'll be easier to pull out what events are and what we're looking towards. All right. This is key information, and this particular statement, which is a major progression can attract an event with no other reinforcement, is seminal to the work we do in Hermetic progressions. Last week, I do believe, and the week before, I gave you the diagram of the keg of dynamite, the fuse, and the match. Transits and minors become triggers and fuses to greater events, which are the major progressions. However, you may not have any minor progress reinforcements, nor any transit reinforcements to spark an event in your life. So a major progression carries power enough to bring about an event to happen. In this case, we've talked about love and money, most people's favorite topics, but there's other things. There's accidents, there's illness, there are periods of learning in our life. There are times of harmony with other relationships other than spouses, whether we get along or disagree with colleagues, co-workers, friendships, people we know through groups or organizations, so on and so forth. All of those have events tied into them. The other thing is major moon progressions, minors, and transits can help narrow the timing of events by adding thought cell activity. Remember, major progressions, 1/2 the power. Minor moons, 1/7. And major moon progressions, 1/7 the power of the natal chart. So they work as reinforcements, adding stimulus. And the more we have, the closer we get to pinpointing timing in persons' lives. Otherwise, we're looking at windows of opportunity. And keep in mind, a lot of the things that happen in life happen over periods of time. The accident may happen in a moment, but other things, such as entering into a relationship, that could span years, or taking up a course of education that could span years, or taking up a particular vocation that can span years or decades in one's life. These are longer windows of opportunity. All right, and we're talking about thought cell activity here too. Remember the diagram from before. I've probably included in tonight's, just in case any of you forget, that the inner plane interpenetrates. It has a molding effect over the outer plane. That is the realm where our thought cells are active, and it's through their activity that events are attracted into our lives. What else do we need to know? Well, guess what? Vicki, interpreting is an art. It really is. As I was describing before, a computer cannot synthesize information. An astrologer can. The astrologer can take, after spending time with someone, the astrologer can start absorbing the educational level of an individual, their language skills. They can take into account their age, their chronological age, and absorb that into their interpretation. They can assess how events have unfolded in the past through dialogue and discussion with a client, and add that to the synthesis. So this is where the art form takes place. And one of the reasons why, in every class I teach, I beat you over the heads with vocabulary is It's all about language. It's choosing a specific word. It's the art. I have had, in numerous sessions, I will say something and the client will say, you know, I used that exact phrase in a conversation today. And that is because if you can understand the symbolic or the archetypal language that we're working with, it triggers things within the astrologer that where the art form is, getting that to relate specifically to the person that you're interacting with. You must take into consideration, we just talked about this, the education and training of the individual and the mental habit systems he or she has cultivated. That can only be done in your intake by the astrologer not just doing the progressions, but sitting and spending time and going over the natal chart. That is where you start to absorb all of that information. And the more of that you know, the better you can work with the what and when things will happen in an individual's life. This is the hardest thing I have discovered for most astrologers. It's on the board, but I'll say it out loud. Focus only on the characteristics of the planets involved and the houses involved. I have interacted in the, well, I've been studying astrology 42 years and professionally active for the last 33 years. And during that amount of time, I've had plenty of opportunities to interact within my professional community. And there are brilliant people out there, but I've also discovered that there can oftentimes, in approaching a chart, be a real lack of focus. So what I want to encourage in this class is really focusing in to find your information, focus in on what's essential. This is one reason why in Hermetic astrology, we work with planets, signs, houses, and aspects. You should be able to explain everything from that in a chart.
Christopher, we have a question.
Who is it from?
Jeff from Chicago.
Hi, Jeff from Chicago.
Am I correct to infer that minor progressions are essentially those that are triggered by the progressed moon exclusively?
I'll tell you later. We're actually going to get to that tonight. So exercise the spiritual trait of patience, and I will reveal all.
You know what, Christopher, something that people out there probably need to know, there's a time delay in case they need to be reminded.
there is.
Between when do they know that?
Some people do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you that didn't hear that clearly, I'll remind you. When you blog, or what do you call it? Message us. There's actually a time delay between when I'm speaking. Right now, it is 6 minutes before the hour, Mountain Time. Look at your chart, not your chart, your clock. Looks like a chart. Has 12, and it's a circle. Look at your chart when you actually hear me say this, and look at what time it is. And that will help you to determine what the delay is. So when you write in, it takes a little bit of time for me to get that information and to speak back. It'll come to you a little bit later, but this teaches all of us patience. Now, look, I poked something else up here. Eliminate concepts that are improbable due to birth chart predispositions. Yeah, well, the fantastic can happen. You know? One can become a farmer. Think of Green Acres. After living in Manhattan all their life. There are things that can happen. But we're advised to somewhat narrow our focus to those things within the chart that we see as probabilities based on strengths, weaknesses, harmonies, and discords within the chart. If the individual has a loaded 4th house, nothing in the 9th house, and shows no actual interest in travel, a progression coming along to stimulate the 9th house does not necessarily mean they'll be going around the world in 80 days. So, in a sense, we narrow our focus. All right, here's a concept. You must consider the age of the individual and what events may be likely or unlikely based on the natural chronology of life events. In this country, although I had a grandmother who used to joke about being from Appalachia and getting married at 13. She was actually from another part of Missouri. And I think married between 18 and 20. So she was always pulling our leg. But she liked us to think she was from the Ozarks. There are cultures, if we were in India, we could look at a chart at age 6 and perhaps say someone might be getting married, where marriages are arranged and even celebrated in one's youth. I think in our culture you have to be 16 and get special permission to get married. That's probably the youngest that can happen, and generally it's not until one's emancipated that that takes place. So you have to know the culture one is participating in. Therefore, seeing a Venus aspect coming up in the chart of a 5-year-old or a 7th house aspect, one is not as likely to say that, oh, look, you can get married. You have to figure out what the probabilities are that are chronologically logical. Say that 10 times fast.
I'm not sure about that, because that brings into play bias that is already there, or certain expectations of patterns based on past events. And life isn't always like that. It's like believing in statistics as being the only way that reality can take place.
So you think one should tell a 5-year-old they could get married that year?
No, I wasn't actually relating it to that particular event, but I was thinking in terms of what you're saying about looking at probabilities of things. I don't know. Do we know all the factors? Do we know the little things?
No, but to do a good job for a client, you have to have some parameters in your interpretation to be helpful to them. I have clients who complain that they can't meet anyone, and I may tell them, well, you know, I just spoke 2 years ago to a client who at 92 got married. So that is not a chronological improbability. Some persons might think so, but I have seen clients at any, above the legal age of marriage, proper aspects can bring marriage to pass up until your dying days. But unless the environment is different and the culture is different, then the probability of that prior to the legal age of marriage, it won't take place. So death can happen at any time in one's life. Not that I recommend interpreting that in anyone's chart, though I think next week or the following we'll look at death. We'll look at times people have died to see what was going on in the chart, because we also have to look at health. Progressions affect health. It's really very important. By the same token, for the most part, again, looking at somebody that may be 7 years old, you might not say, because they're having a midheaven progression or a sun progression, that they're going to necessarily have a career advancement. At that age, there's a very good chance they're not employed. However, under those aspects, a child of 7 could receive a trophy or have an honor in a class. So you use a chronologically appropriate expression for that. And this is important in terms of honing accuracy, but again, you know, occasionally the improbable happens. And although it is a very minute percentage of the population, there are persons, and certainly 30 years in my past, I worked with individuals who were child stars. In Hollywood, there is a culture prevalent there that we might not find in some other places where one can go to work at an earlier age and have those experiences. So this is the information the astrologer has to constantly synthesize in their interpretation. You know, what is appropriate, knowing the age, the culture, the environment of the person that they're working with.
I'm going to ask a really stupid question based on the one about predictors of marriage, and if, well, something like what you're just talking about, and if it doesn't seem likely for the person, what other kinds of things could come under that influence? Do you know what I mean?
Of what might otherwise, okay.
What other
That's not a stupid question. That's actually a question that inquiring minds want to know. Because, yes, you can have 7th house progressions and or Venus progressions. They will function somewhat differently or the same. We know that either can bring about marriage. 7th house progressions can bring about other types of companionship, where you form very powerful alliances with other people. Venus aspects do the same. And in English, we're somewhat thwarted in that we only have one word for love. I think the Greeks had 10. And one of the forms of love that's described is the love between friends. So when you have Venus aspects, if you're not having a romantic time in your life, you might find that there's something else going on, that there is affection on another level taking place in your life, whether it's in friendships, collegial relationships, and through service of some kind. There are other ways that love, the force of love, enters our lives. Hopefully that answers the question. All right. Note whether or not the environment in which the individual lives can allow the event to find full expression. Back to the environment. The orchid farm in the Arctic Circle that I like to talk about. The environment does not support that. Though, you know, watching the local news, the New Mexico environment does support indoor pot farming.
Is it really?
Well, not legally. But there, you know, news report last week, they were busting someone who had quite an operation going. The smell gave it away. So there, I'm using that as an example that yes, you can do things under carefully controlled environments if you're willing to invest enough to do it. There is, for example, there is north of here, halfway between here and Santa Fe, there is a piece of land outside of the town of Buttigers where I'm thinking 20, 25 years ago, it was developed into outlet stores. What happened? It closed. Why? no one went there. The environment did not support there being a mass commercial establishment in the middle of nowhere. And then, about 10 years ago, numerous of my friends invested in this location because it was becoming a cultural marketplace. And probably a dozen artists I know put their life fortunes into opening stores up there. And I tried not to be a naysayer to anyone, questioned the efficacy of that, considering it had folded as a chain outlet center. Well, within a few years, that also collapsed. Pay attention to your environment. It will either support what you're doing or it doesn't. If you are a woman looking for love and you never leave the house, as a counselor, I do encounter those. I mean, truly, you've got two options. You know, it's UPS or Federal Express, because that's or the Jehovah's Witness. Those are the only people coming to your door.
Online dating.
Or online dating, yes. But then at some point you will be forced to leave the house. And that's a recent invention. But again, you have to consider the environment. Does the environment support what it is you want to accomplish?
But then you could look elsewhere in the chart to see what kinds of environments might be good places to be at that time.
Absolutely. Look to the sign and house where Venus falls. Because that's where you find love. Question?
Good, I found.
Yay,
It's
hold
just
on.
sitting right on the ground right there. And I'm like, what? The material has done with there.
You're as good as Sai Baba. Oops, did I say that?
Doesn't smell as nice, does it?
Okay. Another interpretation guideline. Again, majors, minors, transits. And this will appeal to you, Summer. The astrologer must offer alternative expressions for any aspect. You just asked, well, what if you have these love aspects and there's no love? What else can it be? You have to offer that. You have to be able to say that, well, this is a period in your life where there's a window of opportunity for you to connect up with someone you may really like, or it might be a time that you just decide to go out and be social and form new friendships and have a more gregarious life. This is the really hard part. The astrological counselor must offer suggestions as to how to best work with each aspect. We call this the process of alchemy. In 2 weeks, we're going to discuss this. It's key. It's really seminal to the work that we do, because one can see progressed aspects that may be attracting adverse activities in one's life. Much harder to deal with while they're going on than if you are one of those persons who looks at your aspects years in advance and decides to plan, which takes us back to the old saying, and I'll probably repeat this in 2 weeks, that failing to plan is planning to fail. The advantage of the work that we do is we can see what's on our date book years in advance. It's our date book with destiny, we'll call it that. Here it is again. Etheric boundary line. Oh, I didn't change that. 186, 172. Maybe it's actually changed. You're actually with the times. Bill, Jeffrey, and Glendale connected me up with some interesting Qigong videos on YouTube, where these Chinese masters were having impact over animals and other things at a distance. And we were doing an email exchange on the partially irreverent, on the etheric boundary line. So, astral, remember astral, astrology of a star. Physical, think your body, think your world. The soul operates on the astral realm, the unconscious mind. The body on the physical plane. Things happen first in this higher frequently substance before filtering down to the slower moving physical substance. This is what brings events to pass. And again, this is why we can look at a chart in advance, see the progressions, and have a sense of what's coming about into that individual's life. Okay. Jeff, I will now begin to answer your question. Minor progressions are measured by the movement of the planets during one lunar month, approximately 27 1/4 days after birth. So, let's say in my chart, the moon is at exactly 16 degrees of Libra. What I would do to determine the first year of life is go forward from the day of my birth to the next time in the ephemeris that the moon reaches 16 degrees of Libra. For my second year, I'm looking between that time period and the time that the moon moves the second time, a lunation cycle, or month, as we call it, later. So, by the time you're 55, you're looking into the next year. And actually, you're looking several years ahead. Let's see, 13. You're looking at close to 4.5 years ahead in the ephemeris to determine what's going on. One complete passage of the moon through the 12 signs of the zodiac after birth is equivalent to 1 year of life. This means moving through one complete sign of the zodiac is equivalent to 1 month of life. Through each degree of the zodiac, 1 day of life. Judging from the word minor, how important do you think these influences are?
They're minor.
Thank you. This is a smart room. All right. This is how powerful they are. Minors carry 1/8 the power of the natal chart. One-eighth the power. But you know what? You get enough of those lined up, and you've got some push going on. Now, let's go back. What I recommend each of you doing, and I think Vicki clearly indicated to me earlier today that she wouldn't be doing this, but for the rest of you that might find a spare moment in your day, I suggest that you calculate your minor progressions for a year, but don't do them out a year in advance. You might want to do them a week at a time or a month at a time. and just use it as keeping a journal and write down events. I'm doing this process right now with major progressions, because those to me are the major events in one's life. And as I mentioned last week, I'm one of those quirky people who has actually held on to my calendars and organizers for the last 33 years. And what I started a week ago was creating a chronology of my life, having to rely upon memory and scanty records for about the first half of my life. And for the last 33 years, I'm actually relying upon scanty written records. But somehow, the really important things I happen to write down. Creating a timeline, year, some things you know within a month. If you've kept a record, you'll know the actual day that things have happened. When my sister went into the hospital, when my grandfather died, when my grandmother died. I can pinpoint those things to the day now in this chronology. Once I've completed the chronology, I'm going back to insert the major progressions in orb at that time. I'm only listing what I consider to be the major events in my life because I'm looking at majors right now. I will not be going back for 33 years and inserting the minors. However, I might do this for a month or 2 or 3 to see how, whether or not one has Indian food or curses at the computer or whatever happens in the course of that day. Minors are the minor events in your life, and you can actually track them. Yes?
Jeff asks, can the minors be considered triggers to the major progressions and or transits?
Yes, and you may, I don't know if you attended the last 2 classes where we actually discussed that, and there is a diagram in the handouts for those classes, which you can actually download, Jeff. Yes, we consider minors not so much that they're triggers, but in the diagram we're looking at the minors as being the fuse. The transits are the triggers, the minor is the fuse, the major progression is the keg of dynamite. And that's the sequence of power in all of this. It looks like the trigger is setting off the event, but it's really the keg of dynamite that carries the energy or carries the power. Vicki?
I thought you only looked at minors in context of your majors.
Nope. But since you're
Okay.
on to the next portion of the slide, I'll bring it up. Special consideration is given when minors reinforce planets engaged in major progressions, especially by conjunction and opposition aspect. So going back to what you said, I think, repeat the statement, you only look at your majors?
I thought you only regarded the minors in context of a major.
Yeah. If the you you're using refers to me, that is the case.
Okay.
I really only look at minors to figure out when conjunctions and oppositions happen to major progressions or planets in the natal chart. That's what I do. But you can actually track your minors, and again, you can have an aspect and not have an event, but they can also match up with minor events in your life. But they work.
How minor are we looking? Like what?
You got your hair cut, or you know, during that week, who knows, maybe you had time to watch your favorite TV show all week, or it could be things like that.
Yeah.
Or maybe that was the week where you really, you know, got along well with your mom, or got your dog to dog training. Now, if this is a companion animal, that might be a major event. That could be major, but again, you have to look what determines minor and what's major. But when I look at my chart, I'm only looking at conjunctions and oppositions, and in tonight's chart, I keep using that word. That's the key word for tonight is chart. In tonight's class and chart both have
And
5 letters.
And clock.
And clock, they have 5 letters. So, chart can now be substituted for any 5-letter word that begins with a C. In tonight's class, when I look at minors, I'm just going to be looking at them not as standalone aspects, but as reinforcements to majors. Oh, these both came up. Minor progressions can be followed to determine some of the lesser influences coming into the life under periods of shorter duration.
So can you do something like look at a pattern? Like if there are a bunch of minor progressions occurring within a major, then it might give it some shape or
It
something.
does. It definitely does.
Yeah.
And I think what will happen, Summer, is when we start doing some hands-on tonight, we'll get to see how this takes shape. It's going to be easier with students in the class than with those at a distance. But I do have questions and things that have been sent me over the email by students, and I may, at a distance, I may pull up their charts and just talk about them a bit. I want to talk about this last statement here. Conjunctions and oppositions of minor progressed planets to the 4 stellar areals of a major progressed aspect contribute peaks of power during which the major progressed aspect is activated. This is, again, key. If you have 1/2 the power of the natal chart, and then you add 1/8 the power of the natal chart, oh, now I have to do fractions. 5/8. Thank God for 5th grade math. I passed. So, you have 5/8 the power of the natal chart operating at that time. The more minors and transits adding up, it's adding more volume of psychokinetic energy during those periods of time, which means a greater possibility of pulling in an event.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
On the minors, is it 1/8 for each? For each one?
Yes.
So it could be more than 1/8.
Yes. Yeah, if you have a lot of minors happening at the same time, it's like throwing another log on the fire.
Mm-hmm.
2 things I want to address that came up as sort of questions for me this week. One of the students in Manchester sent an email question. We were looking at an individual's chart and then working with a different birth time than what was originally believed. And
What now?
it's like rectifying a chart.
Oh,
You think
okay.
you were born at 1,
Oh,
but
okay.
instead it was 2:49 is the time. And you go back and you do the chart again. Well, what's going to happen?
It's a different chart.
It's a different chart, yes. Your house cusps have shifted, and this means the planets have shifted. In this chart, every planet except for Jupiter had shifted into other houses. So I mentioned in the email that what happens is not only does house influence shift, but the progressions shift. And that created some confusion. And I want to explain that again, because it brings us back to the concept of 4 stellar areals. Even though the time of your birth has only changed by a couple of hours, chances are, with your progressions, you're going to have the same aspects, but when they enter, become perfect and leave changes, because we've decided from major progressions, what is it, 4 minutes of time corresponds to a day.
Yeah.
A lot of 4 minutes fit into an hour and 49 minutes. So that throws it off by days. But the other thing you have to look at is when the house cusps change, the planets then rule different houses. And when you look at a progressed aspect, you're looking to see what house is being stimulated. So the areas that are being activated also change. So that's one topic I wanted to bring up in case that wasn't perfectly clear to everyone else. The other was, I believe it was Renee, who said that pretty much what she discovered in observing progressions was that the faster moving planet is generally applying to the slower moving planet. And this pretty much always holds true when you're looking between progressed to progressed planets. However, sometimes you can have progressed to natal planets where that's not true. Saturn could be applying to a trine to the moon, and we know the moon moves fastest of all. But it's in the natal chart, but the Saturn is applying by progression. So in that case, it's not the faster moving planet, but almost always between progressed to progressed, it's the faster moving planet that is the applying to the aspect. So those were the two questions that came up in emails this week. Let's see. I'm going to give you a quote or two, and then we're going to go on to looking at charts. It is much easier to determine the periods during which, because a major aspect is reinforced and given great power by one or several minor progressed aspects to its terminals, an event of importance will come into the life due to the psychokinetic power of the thought cells, thus given new energy. Then it is to determine, this sentence is so long, I actually got lost, but I'm not going back to the beginning. Sorry about that.
It's a Zane.
It's a Zane. Yes, we were talking about it's much easier to determine. Then it is to determine how favorable or unfavorable the event thus attracted will be. The harmony or discord of the minor progressed aspect of the major progressed terminal seems to have no influence on the harmony or discord of the major progressed aspect. But add an R to power, and you'll have a complete word. But it does markedly step up its power.
So, in other words, harmony or discord doesn't matter.
Yes, thank you, Vicki. To translate that for our audience abroad, basically, whether you have major progressed trines, sextiles, squares, semi-squares, sesqui squares, doesn't make one iota of difference in the harmony or discord of the event. That is determined by the major progression and the natal chart conditioning of the planets. All the minor progressions do is amp up the power. Think of turning your stereo up. That's what's happening. It's like, flipping up the bass on the stereo. It creates more reverberation. This is why when I look at minors, I'm looking at minor progressed conjunctions and oppositions to the major planets. That's what I'm looking at. Why? Because of all the aspects, those two aspects carry the greatest amount of oomph. They have power, and they are able to add to the energy that's being stored in the major progression. An even longer quote, and then we'll actually look at charts for the next hour. All right, the indicated major event may be expected during the time the progressed aspect is within approximately 1 degree of the perfect aspect. The same orb of influence is effective for sub-major progressed aspects, major progressed aspects of the moon, for minor progressed aspects, and for transit aspects. For an event to be attracted by any of the three types of progressions, it is not necessary that any other type of progression contribute to it. But during the period a major progressed aspect is within the indicated distance from perfect, there will occur several brief periods when, due to the major progressed moon or a minor progressed planet, or both, or several minor progressed planets forming an aspect with one of the planets involved in the major progressed aspect or affecting the house ruling the anticipated event, the thought cells working for the event are given unusual accessory energy, and it may confidently be expected the event will occur on one of these peaks of thought cell activity. Did you get that, all of you?
Yeah.
I'm seeing a few heads shaking. Thank you, Vicki. I'm glad you got that. It's a great quote.
Scary, isn't
For
it?
depth alone. Basically, what is being said here is everything I've said in the last hour. You can have an aspect and no event, but chances are the more reinforcements you have to a major progression, with major progressions of the moon in orbit at the same time, minor progressed conjunctions and oppositions, and with transits, to be talked about next week, conjuncting and opposing major progressed or natal planets. That adds what I love this combination of words, unusual accessory energy. We're not talking about bags and stars. Though for some, if it's a progressed aspect of Venus, you may be accessorizing. Add that to your list of alternative expressions for Venus. We do.
Spending more time in the mirror admiring yourself.
Yes. It's been years. Okay. Now let's make sense of all of this. Okay, I'm going to pick the chart that's on the top of my desk. This is from Chris in California, who is looking to start a new business at this time. I'm going to move myself over to the computer. Oh, thanks.
Chris asks, are reinforcements considered to be what the Church of Light calls rallying forces?
In part.
In part.
Yeah. Rallying forces can represent a whole lot of things, which I'd rather not go into tonight because I want to focus on something else. And that's going to really make us behind.
So the answer was partly.
That's partially correct, yes.
Can you do that for you, Christopher?
Could you?
Yes, I'll do that.
Thank you. Oh, the power. I get to issue commands from afar. Let's open up students. Open up Farquhar. Oh, go up to 2010 progressions. Actually, close that out because I can't get that on screen.
Well, I can make it smaller.
But I actually have it in the horoscope program, which will allow us to progress it open.
Okay, gotcha.
I mean, you're going to have to sit there for a while, so.
Okay, so what do we want
Let's
to...
go down, scroll down below the PDF files and see if there aren't horoscope files in there.
Oh.
Look at that. Great. Open that up.
All right. I may need to have the,
No, you could have opened it back there.
well,
You just didn't go into it.
Usually if I double click, it'll just.
yeah, I did that, and I also right-clicked and did that, so let me just go in here and do it that way.
Okay, that worked. Now progress it by major progression.
Do you want report or chart?
First, let's progress the chart. I like to look at it in a physical form, and then we'll do a report and see if we can pick out any aspects.
Today's date or another date?
Perfect. Yeah, let's use today's date. All right. Based on our understanding from previous classes, what are we looking for in terms of opening a new business?
MC, 10th house.
And if you want that business to make money,
Second house.
very good. So what we are looking for is stimulating energy right now, plus unusual accessory energy, to these houses. Looking at the natal chart, 10th house, midheaven, Cancer. So the chief ruler of the 10th house is Uranus. The co-ruler of the 10th house is
Moon.
the moon. The moon in the natal chart falls in the second house. And look where the moon is by progression.
Second house. Stimulating.
Lucky you, since we're only a few weeks apart in age, I'll be having the same aspect, what we call a lunar return, in about 6 weeks. So this happens every 28 years when the moon goes back to the position held at birth.
And what does that actually signify?
It's a major progressed moon aspect, the value of 1/7, the power of the chart. Nevertheless, it is stimulating. So we can see right now, no wonder she may
Thinking about
have
it.
recently been feeling some urgency towards this. What's been going on the last few months if we look at this chart? As the major progressed moon passes through the second house, it has been conjuncting natal chart planets and progressed planets during that period of time. So ideas about what? Second house?
Money.
Making money are active. Ideas about career are being active at this time. What we would also want to look at are any progressions involving the midheaven, which is now at 5 Virgo. So it is forming a sextile. What is that? 642, 527. Not yet. Let's actually open up her progressed report. We'll use today's date and maybe take it to just the end of the year.
Can I just take it a year up?
Sure.
Where's the arrow key? And do you have any other
I think the numbers are up at
requirements?
no. Oh, just filter the majors, take out the parallels, because they take up so much room. I only look at parallels, and I've said this before, progress parallels, if there is nothing else in the chart to explain the event.
Do you want semisexual seskies and, or,
You know, let's take those out, just for, I do look at those. Let's keep the sextile, because that has some strength. Okay, we're good to go.
okay, now I can't get,
Up to report parameters. And then,
I can't get to,
oh,
oops.
yeah, this is funky.
Not working very well on the screen, is it? Well, let's see. I can't grab hold of it. Oh.
If you get the outer edge, sometimes that works.
The hidden edge.
Yeah, no.
I just can't get it up far enough to get to the
You know,
bottom
I
of the
may have
screen.
to go in and
what-
redo my settings, because my settings are for,
Oops. If I could get rid of this bar down here at the bottom of the screen,
Just you can-
and I don't know what
you
that
can
is.
grab it and just
It's
move it
not
on there.
something I'm familiar with.
Just
Grab
shove
the
it-
bar,
just grab the bar at an empty space and just move it over there. At an empty
Any
spot.
empty
Yeah,
spot on the
any
bar.
spot.
No,
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
with,
spot.
no.
Someone who knows what they're talking about.
Let me
here.
try it, since I've actually worked with it before. I might, somebody go, if I could sit there.
Oh, sorry.
And you can
I don't have
go up to the front and
bottom.
talk. Somebody tell a joke. Okay.
Oh,
See, if you
you got a
get it-
tiny bit of it.
See the your icons down at the bottom, that bar? I don't know how to get rid of that.
Well, like you were just saying, you can just pick it up. As long as you don't pick it up near one of the icons, you pick it up and you can move the whole bar to the side. No, but you didn't. You were near the icons. That
And
was
what
the
are you
problem.
guys going to do?
That's what you're doing.
Yeah, hitting the enter button is another alternative.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
duh. Okay.
Good. Now I've pulled off my microphone. We at the Church of Light are really smart. We're figuring out how to use our programs. So, I actually will need to go in and I have the
You won't
settings on large because when I'm at my docking station, I have a really large screen. Whereas,
You want it sorted on, or does it matter?
I'm actually accustomed to
On in?
in,
Okay.
yes. So let's look at what's going on here, and then we're going to do something else, which is then looking, we're going to pick an aspect and then look for the reinforcing minors at this time. So, business planets, Saturn and Jupiter, well, these have been in orbit since 1996. And she's got about 4 more years of mileage on this aspect. Squares, again, would have to go back and look at the natal chart to see what the energy is.
So,
And let's, thanks, Vicki. Now let's look at the astronauts.
astronauts. Or-
Sort by power. Okay, well, Jupiter is prominent and Saturn is weak in this. So what we can see is the energy being carried by this. Saturn, the weakest planet, and discordant. Now sort by harmony. Jupiter is the most harmonious planet. So even though the aspect is a square, what we might suspect to bring about obstacles, nevertheless, Jupiter is by far more powerful in the chart, and also Jupiter has about 2.5 times the harmony as Saturn does. Any aspect to Saturn is going to add a degree of discord. Let's go back to the progressions and see if there's any other business aspects involved here. I don't see anything to the moon. We do see an aspect coming up affecting her house of money. The progressed midheaven, which governs career, business, goals, enters a sextile to Venus, the chief ruler of her house of money. On August 6, 2010, it becomes perfect July 2011 and leaves in July 2012. Midheaven aspects and sun aspects last for 2 years. So that's something that is going to affect her business-wise. And the other thing we're looking at is Uranus. Well, guess what? Uranus has not moved from the time of her birth. So
Well, it's
this-
also in her 10th house, too.
Correct.
Does that factor into her business ideas?
It does, and I'm actually not quite sure what the idea is.
Should I go back to her chart?
Well, no, she sent it to me, but it's somewhat esoteric, which was fitting for Uranus.
Yeah.
So is the idea that you actually look to see what planets are in the natal chart and the sign that of the second house, and then look to where those things are in a progressed chart?
Yes.
To look at what's happening in your career and
Those are
your
the
business.
4 stellar areals that we're looking at. The planets in the natal chart, where they are by progression, and then the house cusp that they govern.
Okay.
So in this case, let's close out the progressions you did.
The progressions?
Yes.
Report? Or
The progressions report, yes.
Oh.
And let's do a new progression report. This time, let's just use the next 3 months. Let's go out till August. Let's filter the majors. We'll take out the parallel again. We'll take out the lesser aspects, the less powerful aspects, the inconjunct, semi-sextile, semi-squared. And now let's go back to report parameters, go down to minor progressions, and here, let's go filter the minors. Okay. Let us take out everything except conjunction and opposition aspect. And hit the Enter key.
Oh,
The one on the keyboard.
Can you look at, the planet that might be in the second house in the natal chart? Do you also take into account its house or its sign of domicile? Can you use that stuff? Or does that get a little bit tricky?
I say keep it simple. If you keep it simple and look for the information, usually you can find it. One doesn't have to bring in the kitchen sink to find.
But if you were to, it wouldn't create problems. I mean, it would just be another little thing that maybe you could have.
Yeah, you might find some information from that, but I think you can actually find it through the progressions.
Okay.
Let's go up. You've actually opened it, right?
Which one do you want me to open?
Just hit the plus at the top there. Okay. Here we've got major, no minors during this 3-month period we're looking at. Major progression, no minors. Major progression, no minors. Let's see if we can scroll down and find something going on. Look, we have minors. The major progress, Saturn, Jupiter, square, has minor reinforcements. Well, that helps when you have an aspect that lasts, what, 18 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you have an aspect that lasts 18 years, it helps when you have these other shorter window periods that you get to look at to see what's going on in that period of time.
I have a question, Christopher.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, that one peaked in 2005, right? So, wouldn't you, in order to look at the kind of energy that this person is working with, wouldn't you want to look to that period from 96 to 2005 to see what they were doing with that energy?
I would, but she's not present,
Right.
and I haven't. It's not like a normal session where you sit down with someone, you do your intake, you do the natal chart, they talk to you about their hopes, their wishes, and dreams. You know, in the case of this class, I get very obtuse little notes from people.
Right.
And that's all you have to work with. So,
Okay, yeah.
for the sake of just looking at how progressions work, not necessarily making predictions for Chris, this is all we can go with. Is looking for reinforcement. Yes, aspects are more powerful from the time they start to peak, but nevertheless, it is still an orb during
Right.
that period of time. And I've actually seen a lot of events happen with separating aspects. Why? Because you get reinforcements that come along. Oh, we might say, oh, Mars and Saturn, scary. But again, with minors, we're not looking at them as adding conditioning energy, only adding an 8th more kick to the chart at that time. Think psychokinetic energy. What's going on in that soul on the inner plane that draws events in through the environment? That's what's happening from May 21st to June 26th, May 24th to June 18th. These business planets are getting additional stimulants. When we look at business in a chart, we look not only to the 10th house and 2nd house, 10th house career, 2nd house income, but we also look to Jupiter and Saturn, which are the business planets. Jupiter's retail, Saturn's wholesale. The next aspect, we want to look at money. Well, my guess, Venus square Mercury. This would require our going back to the natal chart, to the astrodynes, and actually evaluating the relative power of Venus, the chief ruler of the house of money. Let's hit the power button here. We can see she's got 6.2. Not a whole lot of power in the chart. But if we were looking at her by harmony, I'd say that's number 2. That Venus is 2nd in harmony. Let's go back to the aspect now, Vicki. You're going to get wrist whiplash.
With Jupiter and Saturn, you're talking about wholesale retail in terms of function or product, but what about services? How would you look at services, a business that is focused on your service?
6th house.
Yeah, we'd look to the 6th house for service.
Okay.
Any type of service work.
And then that would be things like consultancies.
Exactly. Though I even think of that as more being the 7th house when you're consulting.
Okay.
Yes, the question from the gallery.
Renee says, I know as a rule parallels are too long, but what about when long progressed parallels peak? And Chris has 2 major progressed parallels about to peak.
Mm-hmm.
So she's wondering about parallels when they peak.
They add intensity of energy. Though my experience with parallels is they're like the background hum in your life. It's a thing that you just sort of learn to live with because the energy is there and operating. And yes, a peak of parallel can bring some stimulus, but more likely if there are some minors and transits associated with it to help give a little more shove to what's going on there. So, and I don't want to focus on parallels tonight because, as I said, I actually only look at them when there's nothing else to explain them. They have some energy, and in a natal chart, they have a lot of energy, but because they last so long, the only way you can attach events to them is through the minors and transits. That certainly is my experience. The other thing about parallels, and this is a digression, but when you do compatibility between charts, parallels between charts are definitely connecting points. So let's look at money. Venus is square Mercury in the chart by progression. This is being reinforced since Venus governs the house of money, and we know that that's an area that Chris is somebody who might be very creative, can make money through creative or artistic means, interest, with music, art, drama can all be stimulated.
She says she does environmental music films.
Okay?
Is there a natal aspect between the two of them?
We'd have to go back to the natal chart to do that. All right, let's view aspects. No aspect between Mercury and Venus, natally.
What's MR again?
Mutual reception,
Okay.
which is based on essential dignities.
Okay.
All right, but let's talk about this now that we have the chart up. Progressed Venus is in the 4th house, environment, squaring Mercury in the 1st house of self and self-expression, 14 Capricorn to 14 Libra. So there's the energy right now that's being expressed. We know that Venus in this chart is, let's use our rules that we came up with earlier. Mercury is stronger than Venus in the chart by power. So I would hazard the guess, looking at this aspect, since of the two, Mercury is stronger and discordant, what would happen under a Venus-Mercury square by progression? The stronger planet is being stimulated. Mercury in the 1st house, conjuncting the ascendant, discordant. What's going on?
A lot of thinking about it, talking about it.
And then there's that word stressed out, that hyphenated word.
Yeah.
There is a good chance, Chris, that you could be getting stressed out over this. It may even be a time where, during the period this aspect was in orb, that because it's a square, which is an obstacle compound stimulating the discordant Mercury in the 1st house, that a lot of thought energy has gone into this. But I would hazard to say that obstacles, square, keyword, have come up that have prevented the realization, the economic Venus realization of some of this during this period of time, even to the point where there may be, there are sometimes when we're doing a business where we have greater outflow than we have income. We end up investing in what we're doing with the hopes that it's going to return something to us. Let's go back and look at the aspect report with minors and see if that's being...
She says her business is environmental music films dedicated to raising vibration of humanity.
Great. Humanity can use that. But my guess is from September of last year up to this point, that it could be a time where it's just a little bit harder to make money from what she's doing, and she may be putting a lot of energy into it, but not seeing the immediate cash flow return. That aspect is being stimulated. Here's a minor that lasts longer than the major. Minor progressed Neptune conjuncting Venus. This would be one of those aspects, if you have a minor aspect like this, you pay attention to it. This creates a theme for a period of time in your life of the utopian urges in a prominence compound with the social urges.
So on what basis are you saying pay attention to it? Because of the duration, or because of the prominence of the planets?
The duration of the aspect.
The duration.
Yeah, I went for, minor progressions we expect to move fairly quickly. I went through a period where minor progressed Saturn sat on my midheaven, which he also rules. And it was rather annoying. So, this is a quick aspect. Minor progressed ascendant conjuncting Venus. And we have July of this year, Venus conjuncting Mercury through August 13th. So my advice based on this, we also want to look at income producing. We could go down to the next aspect, which involves the ascendant conjuncting the moon. I believe the moon is one of the co-rulers of the second house.
10th house.
And the co-ruler of the 10th house. It falls in the second house. Here's where we might get some of our happy notes to this conversation. If I was just looking at the previous aspect, Venus square Mercury, I'd say, Chris, you're probably putting a lot of energy into this and not getting a lot of financial compensation. Be careful of mortgaging your house to fund your art project. Because of Venus moving through the 4th house, squaring Mercury, it might not be sound logic that you're functioning with. Nevertheless, there is more than one aspect going on in the chart. Here the ascendant has moved up to conjunct the moon, November 09 to June 2012, and what's happening right now is minor progressed sun has been conjuncting the progressed ascendant in that second house. We'll go back to the chart and add another ring to it. But let me do these first. The sun conjuncting the moon, Venus conjuncting the ascendant, Mars conjuncting the ascendant, Mars conjuncting the moon during these periods of time, which can actually show periods of some income production. So let's now go place the minors in, and we can
Or
look.
could it mean that she's spending money?
And she could be spending money, but it's hard to communicate with the time distance between us to know if that's what's going on.
She says it's an artistic Neptunian return, no money, utopian. Yeah.
Okay, then guess what?
Jeff,
I would, Chris, I would set some caps on what you're doing, because you don't want to go into hawk for this project until you start seeing money coming back from it. All of the aspects in your personal chart right now, although this indicates you can make money from somewhere, be careful with the project right now so that you don't undermine yourself in other ways economically. It's, in a sense, waiting for the right time for this project to be ripe. And be conscientious while this aspect is in org of the areas of your life that are actually income producing, and really focus in on working them at this time.
What about the MC sextile Venus down there?
Let's look at that.
Oh, keep thinking
I
you've got
can't.
control.
Yeah, I wish I was in control, but life tells me otherwise. The only thing I can control is my thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Jeff has a question. Should one use the progressed houses over natal houses when delineating major progressions to the natal planets, especially the progressed angles?
Nope.
No?
That's the short answer, Jeff.
No.
The long answer is progressions have 1/2 the power of the natal chart. We look at all 4 stellar aerials, but we emphasize the natal chart, looking to those points in the natal chart. We have to look at the other 4 points too, but generally speaking, it's the area of the natal chart that is being temporarily stimulated, and then by progression, figure 1/2 that amount of energy in the progressed, where the planets are by progression. But back to her question, here we have, starting up this August, and pay attention, Chris, you have a period of time where the midheaven sextiles Venus, creative projects, best planet in your second house can produce money, or second best planet, and peaks in 2012, July. This will last for 2 years. During that period of time, you have some energy lingering that impacts you at the very tail end of August through to the end of September. And then Pluto comes up by minor progression and conjuncts your MC through the next year. So that's the time to focus in on sort of the new business start. Because whenever there's midheaven aspects, what you're doing can attract attention. I'd like to move to another chart, just so that hopefully over the next 3 weeks.
Should I close this one now?
Yeah, I think we're done with that.
Whoops.
Mike's chart I want to do when we're working on the alchemy, because it definitely requires that.
Okay. Do we have a name that you want to go to? next?
Yes, go to London. There you go. Progress to today.
Do you want,
Does it change every day in progress? If you put in the today, if you put in like next week, would it be all different?
Probably only the moon. Remember, the sun moves 1 degree a year. Pluto, Neptune, Uranus are not going to move very far from even your day of birth by major progressions.
By major.
Yeah.
Then if you have transits, some of them might be.
Those will show up differently. If you're doing the third wheel with the transits, since we're doing minors tonight, let's pull up a minor wheel. Okay. David is self-described as a 3rd house / 9th house guy.
What's that mean?
What's that?
What does that mean?
Well,
he likes
we
to
could all
write-
interpret it differently. I mean, it may mean something to him, but yeah, say something, Vicki.
Well, third house, he likes to, he has an active
Mental life?
mental life. Yeah, he likes to spend time with his own thoughts.
David, she said you're mental.
But Jupiter there in Sagittarius, he has many adventures in his mind.
Okay, great adventures of the mind. What fields might they go into, the adventures of the mind? Religious.
Yeah.
And this could be anything from comparative religion
Could be
to
shamanistic.
philosophy.
Could be shamanistic.
Could be shamanistic.
You may be totally in the cult like me.
Or total occult like you. Yeah, and it can go into any number of areas, because is Jupiter going to be narrow in its researches?
No.
God, no. It's kind of wants to know everything.
Right.
So, there's a start to the dilemma, and what's happening in the 9th house
You've got the moon up there. Moon in what, Gemini?
in Gemini?
So,
It's a little unclear.
Sorry about that. But it's 23 Gemini, and Jupiter is 21 Sagittarius. What is the aspect being formed here between Jupiter and the moon? Stretch of the imagination.
I'm having a hard time seeing what
Yeah.
the numbers are.
Yeah.
Well,
Moon is what number?
the moon is 21 Sagittarius.
Oh, okay.
No, sorry. Jupiter is 21 Sagittarius, moon 23 Gemini.
Oh,
What
they're
happens?
close, they're opposition.
Yeah. Whenever we
Conjunction.
start adding wheels to this, everything shrinks and becomes somewhat invisible. Wait till next week when we do transits. None of you will follow along. I'll be the only one knowing what's going on in here.
Yeah, even when I zoom in, you can't see.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly, those are the opposite natural houses too. Sagittarius is the natural ruler of the 9th house, and Gemini is the natural ruler of the 3rd house. So he's
Doubly mental?
he's turned around
Uh-oh.
and having fun being that way.
Well, let's
I'm
talk
sure.
about the moon in Gemini in the 9th house. How might that impact this man as a form of expression?
Very changeable.
Changeable, but in what way?
Um,
You know, for him, the philosophical world might be a smorgasbord,
Oh,
where
yeah.
he's sampling, you know, different flavors and appetizers here or there. That's the nature of Gemini.
dabbling, like, kind of, yeah.
Dabbling to
Surfing through things.
Dabbling, surfing, you're using your vocabulary, Summer. That's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are great ways to explain what's going on. The nature of the opposition is powerful, it's stimulating, and if we were,
It's drained, isn't it?
not entirely, it isn't, because it's, Pluto does not, oh, excuse me. There is a conciliating factor to one of the planets here.
He says he's a holistic psychiatrist.
There you go.
Wow.
There you go. So with the moon in Gemini, that would enhance the holism, wouldn't it? I mean, that would, because you're looking at a lot of different things, but then you've got the Jupiter, of course, that's expansive.
When is a whole not wholly a whole?
But you know what I mean, when you're looking at them.
Well,
That stopped you.
Well, Christopher, doesn't Mercury bring that opposition? What's Mercury in it? 20-something? 3?
Mercury is 28, and
Oh,
so
28.
Mercury does not form an aspect to Jupiter, but it
Okay.
does to the moon.
Okay, thank you.
So what could go on here is also we could see energy being strongly pulled in two different directions. As a holistic psychiatrist,
Wow.
there could be a certain amount of energy that goes towards writing,
Yeah.
and a certain amount of energy that may go towards teaching. And then there's the process of researching, plus the Mercury ties in to the issue with Gemini on the midheaven. Oh my God, I have to make a living from this.
Right.
And possibly, again, if one writes and teaches, or if one functions in an academic field, there's oftentimes great pressure on you to publish. So I would say that time is probably being strongly divided between the desires to write and the desires to teach, possibly looking at writing as one way of teaching a wider audience. And then there's the issue of the diversity, Gemini, moon, of information out there that's being incorporated into this broad viewpoint or perspective, which is Jupiter.
Could I ask a question there about, like, if he's doing direct practice with clients, where would you be looking at that?
7th house.
Right.
One's practice with clients is the 7th house. The 7th house is the public, it's your client, it's your agent, it's your spouse.
And if you're working with the unconscious with the clients, if you're working in that kind of way, you'd be
12th house.
Okay.
So Saturn's here in Virgo in the 12th house. Though we are digressing somewhat, you can see Saturn's there in the 12th house. This is someone who might have a very Saturn in Virgo. How organized is that?
It's also very grounding, wouldn't it be?
It is. But who knows, considering this, part of the, I mean, this is going out on a limb, but part of the practice might sometimes involve dealing with persons that are feeling or experiencing some kind of psychic obsession or, you know, suffering from witchcraft, compulsions, you know, feeling like there's spirits or other things. With a holistic approach, I would hazard to guess that this is a man who can integrate the woo-woo side into a healthy practice without necessarily, you know, denigrating, pushing that off, looking for some other explanation. So, David, you might get some patrons with profound issues.
Now, when you had the miners up there, there was like 3 planets in the 9th house in the miners. Vicky, if you could just do that again. And I was wondering if the timing, you said he's teaching and stuff, because Mars and Jupiter progressed, the minor progressed is in the 9th house. Would that mean a certain time frame where he would start doing that type of thing? You know what I'm saying?
They could indicate timing when they move into a house, because it shows a sub-influence in that area.
But just by themselves, you wouldn't expect that to be of any real significance, would you?
They're minor progressions.
1/8 the power of the natal chart.
But there's 3 of them in Jupiter.
Yeah.
They are present, and we'll look to see if they're forming reinforcing aspects. So what do we need to look at this chart? My guess is, I don't know if he has to meet a publishing deadline, or whether we want to just look to see if there's a time coming up that's more favorable for completed written work and publishing than at another
Do you want a
time.
report?
Let's do a report, and let's extend it out for, to 2013, but please remove the parallels.
David,
For you,
Oh, good.
okay, so, and, do you want in conjunction, you want everything?
I want everything. And David says,
He says equiposed. Yeah, between psychosis and spiritual emergence. I think he's talking
There,
about.
his
yeah.
personal state?
He was talking about his clients.
Or your work?
He was talking about his clients.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, what we have to look for is the moon, Jupiter, but there are co-rulers. The co-rulers for the 3rd house with Scorpio on the cusp would be Mars and Pluto. And the co-rulers for the 9th house with Taurus on the cusp would be Venus. So we're looking for aspects. This is a lot of aspects. We're looking for aspects to the moon, to Jupiter, to Mars, to Venus, to Pluto, to see what the stimulus is going on.
Do we have a question in mind, or are we just sort of casting about out there?
We're casting about.
Okay.
My wonderful students don't necessarily send in. I've got a list of some of the vaguest questions ever.
Oh, okay.
So I think we're just being asked to take a look at the chart and
Okay.
And cast
see
it
what's
out.
going on, okay.
So in this case, we're looking for things that stimulate publishing. Well, from 2005 to 2015 is a 10-year aspect peaking this July of Jupiter squaring the Sun. The Sun is in the 1st house. David, my guess is you've been working on this for some time.
Hmm.
You know, this may not necessarily be an opus majeur, but it could be something that at least the research that has gone into this project has actually been evolving over a period of time. Because the Sun is involved, if you think back to the chart, it was in the 1st house, not that far from the ascendant, just 6 degrees from the ascendant. My guess is that there's also a personal spiritual journey that's tied into the research somehow, and that the last 5 years, it's had a few twists and turns, because Jupiter brings in a lot of experiences.
What was the Sun natally square Sun? I mean natally square Jupiter?
Yes, well, let me look that up.
Because I know Jupiter was down close to the 4th house cusp.
It is, and the Sun is square Jupiter, so this is just
So that's a
reinforced.
Big deal, yeah.
Yeah, this is something, this has been a lifetime theme, the Sun-Jupiter square. Possibly in David's life, he's had to deal either with, Sun-Jupiter square, this could be persons of conceit, of persons who may have holier than thou, dealing with religious bigotry, or where there's only one way, personal opponents tied into religion. If we think of a first house, third house square.
Oh, David has a question.
Yes.
He says, I am writing a book, Wise Man's Autumn, but get distracted by learning new material that I feel is necessary.
There you go. That's the surfing.
Yeah, that's the dabbling, that's the surfing, that's the...
Gemini, the jack of all trades, master.
It's the Gemini, but it's also Jupiter, because there's a lot being placed on your plate. And the thing is, you have to... That may be happening to some degree to integrate that material, or you decide that's for the next book. In terms of the timing, this is a key aspect. The ascendant squaring Pluto. This has been going on since 2008. That peaked at the end of last year. Yet Venus, the co-ruler of the House of Publishing, has through the end of September to sign a book deal. Actually, it goes on because she then moves into forming a trine to natal Uranus. And that goes on until July of 2011. So we're extending the deadline here for you.
What's the House of Publishing?
Ninth house. Publicly expressed opinions. So my advice in all of this is, this summer you probably set a cap on the additional systems that you're going to integrate into this piece of work. And those things that catch your attention, you decide that, you know what, there'll be time to write another book. And that material will then get integrated into that. We're going from autumn to winter, so when you're really mature, you'll be able to integrate that material and the life experiences that have been accumulated up till that point. What I would like to do is bring in the minors between now and the end of the year. So progression report.
You want the report, sorry. I thought you meant the wheel.
Sorry.
Okay.
The X in the upper right-hand corner will
Thank you.
eliminate that.
Tools, progression report, for the same period of time for the majors? 3 years?
Yes, no, for the majors, let's now make it December 31st, 2010. Let's filter the majors, remove the parallel and all of the lesser aspects. And then for the minors, only conjunctions and oppositions we'll look at.
Is that it?
Yes. And let's open up the minors for this box here, line number 3, line number 4. Let's go down, let's do 5, line number 5, and let's do line number 9.
You've got some energy going.
Yeah, David, you've got some energy going on here. So, to stimulate this process between, the time he wrote me, probably, and middle of June is going to be a period where there's additional energy that goes into the filtration process. We can see these three minor aspects, Mars opposing the Sun, Ascendant opposing the Sun, Ascendant opposing Jupiter, are stimulating this particular aspect right now. So basically, we're looking, although this comes in at the end of the year, I would say between now and June is the time to start tidying up and deciding where the parameters, where the boundaries, where the constraints, what information is fully digested to be incorporated into this work, and what information is not thoroughly understood that can wait for a later writing project.
So when you're talking about filtration, you're talking about modifiers?
I'm talking about the client, we'll call him the client because he's asking the question, setting up a filtration, in a sense, filtering out what material gets included and what gets excluded. That's the filter. Certain things make it through the screen, others don't. And what makes it through the screen is based on depth of understanding. You know, the material, oftentimes new material we haven't absorbed enough in practice or understanding to be teachers of it. And there's other material that we've actually mastered, and that can be incorporated, and therefore when we teach it, we actually make some sense.
So for example, Mars opposition Sun, that's going to give an indicator of how that filtration takes place?
Well, no, it just gives us the timing. Remember, with minors, we're really not concerned about the conditioning energy they bring. We're only concerned that they amp up the volume during that period of time. Whatever's going on here receives extra stimulus during this period of time. This is where it's a challenge, Summer, in that as astrologers, we're accustomed to working with a symbolic or an archetypal language, which we have to switch when we start looking at minors and transits. We switch somewhat. So we're not looking at the conditioning of that energy, but merely the period where it supplies volume. Does that make sense to everyone here?
Right.
What the conditioning, the only conditioning we're concerned about is what's contained here and how that stimulates the natal chart.
Well, and those two, the Mars Sun and the Ascendant Sun, they just give you a period of time where you could probably be effective in focusing on that question at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it creates an effective focus. Now, in terms of publishing, Venus, Venus, major progression, ruler, co-ruler, 9th house. By progression is moving through the 2nd house. Sextile, opportunity aspect. If we're considering the natal chart, Venus is moderate to weak in power, only 6.1% of the power, Mars only 4.8%, and highly discordant. That's not helping the focus. What can happen is it can actually add a little pressure to this process, but nevertheless it is stimulus. And the stimulus goes on till the beginning of the year. So from this we can see the same aspect because Mars is involved. The same aspect is being stimulated. We're adding between June 3rd and June 20th energy from Mercury. The midheaven gets involved, and Mercury, this goes on through the fall. There's a period of time where, again, there's going to be more energy to work on the project. Let's scroll down and see if there's any key publishing. goals to have here. I want to look at the aspects to Venus trine Uranus. And that's here on line 9. That goes from December 1st, 2009 to July of 2011. And we also have a Venus sextile Saturn, which is going on right now, which can help to organize. And that goes on through September 2011. So if I were advising someone on this, I would say that the next month to 6 weeks is the time to clamp down, set the parameters on what's included, what isn't, and then one's working between now and next summer to flesh out and structure the material with the goal of publishing before the fall of 2011. So that would be my astrological advice looking at this chart. And we've reached the end. I'm not even going to tell you your homework tonight, even though it's on the handouts, since those of you who have the horoscope program and are participating in this class and are letting yourselves be known, some of you watch the class and don't tell us you're out there. Perhaps 12th house sons. Hi, Aldo, Dot, Renee, Glenda, David, Jeff, Chris, Alice Marie, Bill, and Mike. Just email me, christopher@light.org. Let me know if you have the horoscope program or not. If you have it, then I would like you to print out your own minor progressions in the way that we've shown you tonight, filtering them to exclude everything but conjunctions and oppositions, setting up parameters. If you don't have them, also email me and let me know that you would like them. And that way, I may make some selections as to what aspects I highlight or not over the period of time, but just so that I can give you something to work with. Probably not till next Tuesday, but something to work with in context of this class. My memory is not such that I can, if you just tell me I can remember, I'll actually need to have it in a written form. So,
David, so much appreciation, and thanks so much, Christopher and Chris.
my pleasure. So, see you all, or you'll see me next week. And we'll be looking at transits, but mostly we're going to be doing more of this, selecting charts, looking at aspects or questions, coming up with the minor and transit reinforcements for timing.
Thank you.
Thank you.